As I said in the last clip, Antiochus decided that he wanted to convert the Jews to his religion. And so what he did was, well, not his religion, but the Greek religion. He was stridently Greek and was wanting to convert them to become good Greeks rather than Jews. He even set up an altar to Zeus inside the temple and then did the unforgivable. He sacrificed a pig on that altar in the temple. Well, once he sacrificed the pig on the altar, that was it. The temple could no longer be used because it now was unclean. And so it could no longer do the things that the Jews had done. And you can remember that the feasts of all the things that bind the people together in the connections with God. And so not being able to do any of those things was a terrible act for them. But of course the Jews were under the thumb of the Seleucids. What could they do? Well, one priest decided that enough was enough. His name was Maccabees Hasmon. And he decided that's enough. That's enough. We're no longer going to take this. And he began an insurrection. And he had the insurrection. He would attack the Seleucid army in hit-and-run attacks, in these guerrilla attacks, and slowly built up more and more people who were angry with the Seleucids. But he died within the first year of this uprising and handed on the mantle of leadership to his sons. His first son was Judas. And Judas was a good military strategist, and he brought more and more people to the cause. And in fact, he was so good at military that they gave him a nickname. And the nickname was the Hammer. I suppose you could say the Hammer of God. And of course, the hammer means, or in Hebrew is, of course, Maccabees. And so he became known as Judas the Maccabee, or Judas the Hammer of God, Judas Maccabeus. And he begins a dynasty, what you could call the Hasmonean dynasty. Hasmonean being, again, an epithet, a concept of those who are the worthy, the good ones. And what he does is he begins a dynasty that would then last for the next 100 years. He dies in battle, hands on to his brother Jonathan. Jonathan dies in battle and hands on to his brother Simon. And Simon Maccabeus is the one who leads the Jews into freedom. And so for the first time since the time of the Assyrians, the Jews now are again ruling themselves. They're again ruling themselves. They're in the midst of these empires fighting with each other, but they have got this little bit of liberty, this little bit of space in which they can now survive. And so this is the Maccabees. And we find out about the Maccabees in a collection of books which are often left out of the Bible. The collection of books is known as the Apocrypha. The Apocrypha, or the hidden books, the ones which aren't quite right, aren't quite good. And in them, for example, you get 1 and 2 Maccabees, the books of 1 and 2 Maccabees, which tell the story of what happened during this period of the Maccabees. And it really was a complicated period. It wasn't a very pretty period, because very quickly the Jews broke into factions, and those factions began to fight amongst themselves. And it's that fighting amongst themselves that eventually leads to the downfall of the Maccabees in the middle 60s, 60 BCE. And it's in that process, though, that they get 100 years of self-rule. It's 100 years in which they're able to rededicate the temple. And once they rededicate the temple, in fact, there's now a special feast that goes with that. The Feast of Hanukkah. You may remember that sometimes we see the Feast of Hanukkah. It's usually in December, usually a week or two before the Christians have Christmas. It's the Feast of Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a feast that comes from the period of the Maccabees. Now, you can understand that the Maccabees were a priestly group. Okay? They came out of the Levitical priesthood. And so it was very much a re-establishment of the priests as where the power of Israel would stand. Essentially, Simon particularly called himself both high priest and king of the Jews. And so here we have a king of the Jews who is also a Levite, also a priest. And The priests take over again. The temple gets re-established. The whole structure, the power structure of Israel moves again down that one path, the path of the cultic practices of Israel, rather than down the path of the rabbinical. And it's in the midst of this that we see the writing of the Apocrypha. We can see in the Apocrypha as well, the other books of the Apocrypha. There's 14 books of the Apocrypha that are written in this period. They're also writing, giving a connection with some of the Greek culture, some of the Persian culture, and in fact some of the things that were happening in the Maccabees. All of those things are wove together in the story of the Apocrypha. Also during this time, we have some other writings, not just the Apocrypha, but this one's called the Pseudepigrapha. The Pseudepigrapha. Now, pseudepigrapha just means false writer. And what that means is that whoever it's ascribed to, they can say that it's not really them who wrote it. So they're pseudo-writings. They're writings which we can't say who wrote them, what their background was, or what the inspiration was for writing them. But these books are also written during this period. So what we have here is a huge amount of writing, a huge amount of development. Also at this time is the writing of the Greek version of the Tanakh. And the Greek version of the Tanakh, you may remember from a previous module, is called the Septuagint. Septuagint meaning 70. It was written in Alexandria in Egypt. And it's written in Egypt because, of course, now Egypt, because of the influence of Alexander and the Greeks, Greek is now one of the major languages of Egypt. And so it's written in order to particularly get the Tanakh out to the Jews who are in Greek areas, rather than in the Aramaic-speaking Holy Land itself. But in the Septuagint is not just the Tanakh, but also the Apocrypha. So the Apocrypha has become part of Septuagint. It's why even in the Christian church, we've retained the Apocrypha in, for example, the Catholic Church, which continues to have the Apocrypha because it was part of Septuagint, part of that early translation by these 70 scholars in Alexandria. So let me close by saying that unfortunately, by the time we get to the middle 60s, in 63 BCE, we have a fight between the two factions, the main factions or the ancestors of this Hasmonean dynasty. And what happens is that one of them decides they need another ally, a big brother, so to speak. And they apply it to the new empire on the block, the Romans.